How would you define media reform?
Well, media reform really is the subject of media reform are the stories that a culture tells about itself. And any society that wants to call itself democratic also has to have democratic stories being told about the people who live within it. And I think media reform is asking that question about, well, how democratic are the stories that we hear? And I think when you look at it, when anyone starts to look at it very closely, it's clear that most of the stories that influence how we think about the world come from a very narrow source, most of it dominated by corporations. So I think of media reform as a way of freeing the culture from the imprisonment that corporate voices have got us in so far, and it's to allow more people to have more voices.
So why is media reform necessary for you?
Media reform is necessary because the present state of media is very closely controlled. And if we want to become a democratic society, then a prerequisite of that is to have media reform so that we have the potential, we have the conditions created whereby we can have democracy.
Okay. How do you work on media reform as an individual?
As an individual, most of my work is educational. And I think that's the first stage, is you have to get people to see what the problem is. There's a communication theorist, Marshall McLuhan, who once said, "We're not too sure who discovered water, but we're pretty sure it wasn't the fish." Which means that, if you're the fish, the water is just the environment that you're in, and you never pay attention to it. And I think that's where we are with media and the people who live in this culture, is that the media that surround us has just become invisible. And the first job is to get people to pay attention to the water. The first job is to get people to pay attention to the stories so they can see where the stories come from. And so that's most of the work that I do, is that kind of first stage of consciousness raising, to get awareness of how important media is to the lives that people live.
So you're talking about like stories as awareness is really important. Can you, why are individual stories so important to the way that we look at media in this country or in the world?
Well, individual stories are important to the extent that they represent different communities. We have to get individuals who are representative of the communities within a society. And I think at the present time, that simply is not the case. There are vast communities that are just not represented in our media system. And one of the jobs of media reform is to make sure that those voices of those people who are underrepresented, who are not heard, who are silenced, that their stories also become part of the way in which we think about the society.